All right, Landon, we're good to go.
All right, Turner, thank you. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for tuning in tonight to the Typologies Design Guide Town Hall. My name is Landon Clark, and I'm the chair of the Salt Lake Community Network and also chair of the Sugar House Community Council. It's an honor for the Salt Lake Community Network to partner with the Westview to host this event. So thank you, Rob. As far as the Salt Lake Community Network goes, we work to educate and promote communication, understanding, and cooperation amongst recognized community organizations and local city, county, and state governments. I'd like to thank Turner Bitton. He's really the one that put this on for us. He's the chair of the Glendale Community Council. He's also the secretary of the Salt Lake Community Network. As far as the format goes for tonight, we will have the English version from 6 to 7 p.m., the Spanish version from 7 to 8 p.m. The Zoom link is the same for both. Did I miss anything, Turner? And if not, I'm going to turn the time over to Tom Millar with Salt Lake City Transportation and Rob Ware from the Westview.
All right, thanks, Landon. So I'm Rob Ware. I'm the assistant editor for Westview Media. It's a little local community journalism publication. And yeah, we're hosting this tonight with Tom Millar from the Salt Lake Transportation Division in order to talk about street typologies, which can be, they can feel complex, they can feel complicated, but only if you don't know what they are and how they work and how they can be incorporated into our lives. So yeah, we're having this as a way to sort of reach out to the public, provide an educational tool and kind of help empower people to take part in this process of defining their communities and their neighborhoods. Keep in mind, this video or this meeting is being recorded, and the entire video for both the English and the Spanish language meetings are going to be posted on Facebook later. So yeah, we are recording now. And with that, there's a lot to cover. So I'm going to turn the time over to Tom to tell us about street typologies.
Thanks, Robin. Thanks, Landon. This project has been going on for a long time. It's older than my 2-year-old daughter. It's an awesome project, and in my opinion, maybe one of the more consequential projects that we've done, at least at the planning level in the transportation division, in quite a long time. And it's very important that we get as many people's voices incorporated into this first edition as possible. Now, the first edition of the design guide, which will just be a kind of a high-level planning document, design guide document, and not a strict construction plan, will have to be updated as time goes on. And I'll tell you a little bit more about why that is as I describe the project a little bit more as well. But I first want to just give a recap of the engagement that we've done to date. So we started this project in January of 2019, and that's a long time. That's almost 3 years. And over those 3 years, we've had 3 different public input, public engagement opportunities. Between those 3, including the comments that we've gotten so far during this 3rd and final round, we've received almost 5,500 comments, which is huge. When we did the pedestrian and bicycle master plan for the city in 2015, I believe we had 1,500, and we thought it was so awesome. And it was awesome. It was great to hear from people. This was, again, an opportunity to bring all of the different projects that the city works on, all of the different voices that are involved with transportation, with land use, with planning, and get all of those voices and all those goals and all of those opinions in one place. So tonight is really the eve of the last day of the last round of public input, and that's why we're calling it Last Call. We want anybody's questions or concerns or comments that they can't quite figure out by themselves using the website or using the survey to come here and to ask all the questions that they have. And so before we get to those questions and do some really fun interactive design activities, I'm going to just give a brief overview of the project, why it's so important, and why we are where we are right now. So with that, I'm going to share my screen, and then I'll get the presentation started. All right, give me just a second to share it. Okay. Rob, can you give me a thumbs up if you see that? All right, thanks. So this is the full name of the project, Salt Lake City Street and Intersection Typologies Design Guide. It's a mouthful, but for short, we call it the Typologies, or the Typologies Design Guide. The reason why we're doing this project is because streets are this huge opportunity that we have in our cities. They make up 80% of all of our public spaces. Now that's libraries, city halls, police stations, streets, parks, all of that land that belongs to everybody. 80% of that is dedicated to streets. So we have these huge opportunities to make these places for all of us, for all people of all ages, but often we fail to really think beyond the car and think about the people who are walking or riding a bike or taking transit or socializing or dining or meeting up with friends. Whatever might be done on a street, when we think about just cars, often those priorities and those needs of a city fall by the wayside. So we knew we had to do better, and we had to do better by design. Here's a great example that I use all of the time when describing this project. This is 1200 West in the Fair Park neighborhood, just south of 600 North. On either side of this street, there are normal single-family residential homes, but the street is this wide. Now, why is it that wide? It's that wide because when that area was developed, Salt Lake City had some street design standards that said, we really want you to maintain this grid, this plat of Zion, as it's called, and we want the streets to be as wide as the pioneers originally laid out. And that was sort of irrespective of what was happening on the sides of the street, whether there were homes there or businesses or both or offices or what have you. So what this guide tries to do is tries to take the concept of land use or planning of private property and transportation or planning of our streets and marry them together so that whatever's on the street or next to the street has the right street next to it, or the right street in between the things on either side of the street. So here's that example on the left, again, 1200 West, south of 600 North, and 1200 West, north of 600 North. The homes don't change. They're the same size. They have the same number of occupants. They have the same number of cars, but you can see that the design of the street has gotten to has really kept people in mind more than just this expansive asphalt that doesn't really serve anybody well and wastes a lot of opportunities. Another thing to keep in mind, and I'll talk about this as we go along, is the concept of design speed. It's the speed that we naturally drive when we're going down the street based on the environment around us. It's the reason why we drive fast on the freeway, because there aren't really intersections or stoplights, and the curves are really gentle, and the road's really wide. It's the reason why we drive really slowly in parking lots, because there's a building here and there's parked cars here and people are coming every which way, and we slow down because there is a potential for danger, and we know that we don't want to cause harm to others and we don't want others to cause harm to us. So taking that concept of design speed, that's kind of dictated what we've done in this project. We want our streets to be slower, we want them to be smaller, and we want them to be safer. And we can do that through design, and through design we can achieve the goals that we want, which is to have safer spaces, which is to have the right street and the right size street for the right place, and to be able to use our streets in their more traditional use, which is a public space for meeting and socializing, walking, biking, and moving around. It still has to serve that function too. In addition to those purposes of this project, it also started an update to our Complete Streets Ordinance. That's a law that the city has that says you should make sure that all streets are as complete as they can possibly be, that they take into account all of the people and all of the uses of those streets. And so we're going to be updating that along with the finalization of this project. And then it gives us a unified vision. Rather than having different ideas about what the right street might look like internal to the city, or I guess the city government, or in our community organizations, we want to make sure that this represents our collective best take on our streets and what they should look like in the future. Now, before I get into the design, I'll just give a general caveat, because it's maybe the most frequently asked question that I get and that I have the opportunity to answer. And that is, will this design guide mean that my street is going to change next year? And the answer is very likely no. This is really just a book of ideas, a reference manual for when your street is in need of reconstruction or serious maintenance, and there's an opportunity to redesign it. Then we would look at this design guide sort of as the first part of our community conversations about what our streets should look like. So let me jump in and show you at a glance what's in this guide. This guide creates 15 new kinds of streets. 15. That's pretty awesome, because right now we really only have about 3 kinds of streets that we refer to as transportation planners and engineers. And those are basically your big streets, State Street, your medium streets, 900 West, 800 South, and your small streets, like a residential street like 1200 West that we just looked at. But we knew that there needed to be more context for where these streets were and how they were designed. So first we started with these 5 critical functions of every street. And then we thought, well, what kinds of land uses or what kinds of contexts or districts might these streets be in, and how might they behave differently? So then we came up with these 5 different types of places: a downtown, an urban village, like a 9th and 9th area, an industrial business park, maybe like Research Park, or the warehouses west of Redwood Road, neighborhoods where all of us live, and neighborhood nodes, which are just these intersections in our neighborhoods that support laundromats and coffee shops and carnicerias. Then we said, okay, now that we have 15 kinds of streets, let's apply them theoretically to, let's apply 1 to each street in Salt Lake City, so that we know which street is going to be applied where, if and when that street comes up for reconstruction. So you'll see this as we get towards the end. You'll see an opportunity to engage with this map, and I'll show you a little bit more about how to use it. And then obviously in the future, we will take these just as our starting point for our community conversations, not as the prescriptive, where we have to do this. This is absolutely what the city is going to do, no matter what you tell us. This is really just the first step of many in determining what our streets should look like when they come up for reconstruction. I said this already. It'll begin the process of the Complete Streets Ordinance update and create that unified vision. So let me tell you a little bit more about how we got here, really briefly. We met with each of the Salt Lake City departments and divisions before we even started on the project, and we said, what can the streets do better for you, and what can you do better for the streets? We took all of those priorities. We took some policy, ordinance, language guidance from our consultant for this Complete Streets. We looked at what priorities would differ based on the different place types. Obviously, we looked at these priorities, these 5. We looked at transportation and other plans, the pedestrian and bicycle master plan that I mentioned, the transit master plan, UDOT's plans, UTA's plans, and made sure that we were incorporating all of those, as well as the community master plans, the West Side master plan, Sugar House master plan, Adams master plan. There are dozens of them. We also made sure that we had some performance measures so that we knew once a street was built, if it was really meeting the goals of this Typologies design guide. We collected these critical dimensions from each of the Salt Lake City and UDOT and UTA partners to make sure that we had the right square footage, the right amount of space dedicated to each mode, and that we weren't just in each transportation mode, and we weren't just guessing, or we weren't putting something in there that wasn't going to fit when push came to shove. We've also been working with UDOT, and we have not shied away from applying the typologies to UDOT streets, and we've been working with them to make sure that that assignment is appropriate and acceptable to them as well. And then we've based a lot of this design off of what we've heard from you, from the public, over the last couple of years. This is a really interesting nugget of information that we got at the beginning of the project in the first round of public input. We asked people, what are your top priorities? If we changed our streets, what do you think should be prioritized more than it is now? And far and away, people who drive, people who don't drive, older people, younger people, people who speak English, people who do not speak English, people who born and raised in Utah, people who are not born and raised in Utah, all of them answered that person mobility, or walking, biking, socializing, was the #1 priority for a street designed differently in the future. And this was how they answered according to different places in their life: near their home, near their work, near schools and parks, near shopping. And you can kind of see that it trickles down, and vehicle mobility is the lowest priority. Now that does not mean that there will not be cars or car lanes or turn lanes or things that are necessary for that transportation infrastructure in our future streets. We still will. It just won't be the top priority at the expense of all of these other priorities. And you can read more about the input that we got during the first round and the second round on the webpage, and that webpage is there at the bottom of this slide and all of the future slides. So all of those things together, we put them in a big hopper, and all of those things spit out these 15 typologies that we've come up with. Some of them are place type specific, and some of them are place type agnostic. But I want to show you a little bit about what you'll see when you go to the webpage to review these street typologies. First, you'll see this table, and the table has a lot of info. It has the amount of right-of-way, or the amount of public space to be used for these streets. That's basically between property lines. You have the different elements within that right-of-way. How many lanes? How many bike lanes? What kind of buses or trains are there? Is there a median or a left turn lane? And what are the widths of the lanes? Then you have your typical kind of planning and zoning information, like the types of buildings and how far back from the street they are set. You have a functional classification, which is really just transportation planner engineer speak for, is it a big road, a medium road, or a small road? You have a max target speed, which is that concept of design speed that I mentioned earlier. This is the speed that people will drive, the maximum speed that people will drive based on the design of that street. It's not the speed on the speed limit sign. It is the speed that people will naturally drive, even if there were no speed limit signs at all. And then you also have number of cars. You have the priorities of each of these street functions that I mentioned earlier, and they do differ typology to typology, because sometimes one is more important than it is in another context. And then you have some examples, both domestic and international. So this is what you'll see on each of these 15 typologies, that info table, and then this design that you can see on the right. You can see it both at a kind of a person view cross section, and you can also see it as a bird's eye view from above. In addition to these designs, we also have some implementation recommendations, practices, procedures, and policies that are more for internal to the city teams, so that we know what we're doing and how we should do it, and so that we can deliver these projects to you, the public. Sorry, this was the last slide on those policies. So what should you review now? Well, we hope that you have already, but if you have not, the soft deadline for the public input period is tomorrow. So there's these 15 distinct street typologies. There's a citywide map with each street assigned one typology each, and then there's the design guide document itself that kind of combines all of this stuff into one place. And again, that's tomorrow, the end of that third round. So here's where you can go to learn more, to provide your input. There's a survey and there's also a map, and we'll be looking at the map a little bit later on today. And then you can, sorry, there's the design guide, the typologies, the map, and then there's a survey at the end. And you can find all of that here in at this website. And then if you need any other information, if you have questions that come up, if you're just not really getting it, you can send me an email, or I can put my phone number in the chat at the end as well. And so that sort of concludes my my presentation, my overview of the why and the what behind the project, and then we're going to be doing some fun interactive things now to make sure that you can really understand it and really visualize what these changes might look like in the future, whether it's next year, whether it's 50 years from now. We don't know, but we want to help you be able to visualize that. So I'll turn it back over to Rob.
Great, thanks, Tom. Thanks for going through that. So there's a lot of information obviously at play here. And these resources are all available online for people to go look at themselves too, right? At the website you linked?
Yep,
okay.
Exactly.
And we will be posting Tom's contact info, and we'll be posting links to those resources on our Facebook page. So that will all be made available. So no need to hurry up and jot it down right now. We'll also show it at the end, just so that everybody has a chance to look at it again. But no need to jot it down and run over there right now. We're going to keep going a little bit here. So I've got before we open up the floor to questions from the audience, which I know Turner Bitten, one of the Westview board members, has been working with the audience on Facebook to collect questions that we're going to turn to Tom. But before we do that, I've got a couple of sort of high level questions that I'd like to ask Tom.
Yeah, I'd love to
get the ball rolling. One immediate question I've got is, have these new typologies been used in any projects so far?
Good question. Basically, as soon as we had the second round of public input, where we published these designs for the first time to ask people, hey, did we get this right? You told us what you wanted before, but really just kind of qualitatively, is this right? Is this a good visual representation of what you want out of your streets? And basically, as soon as we published that, even though it was a draft and we just wanted people's feedback, and again, that was last July and August, we heard from a ton of people, including developers, businesses, even the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints called us up and said, hey, we're thinking of incorporating some of these design ideas into streets that we're redesigning around Temple Square. And so it was sort of an immediate response, which was surprising to me, I think. I thought it would just be kind of like nerdy transportation planner designers that would kind of have some use for it after the project was done, but people have really been I think thirsting for this kind of guidance from the city. What do you really want to see from us if we have to make changes, improvements to the public right of way, if you're talking about a private developer? And then even internal to the city, our other divisions, the engineering division, the planning division, have been able to use at least these draft designs to say, hey, actually, this is what we want. Because in the past, we've really just had to kind of describe it, or we've had to say, oh, well, Columbus, Ohio did it like this, and show an example of a street that was like, oh, kind of the same. So these are really our own designs that we can use to both communicate to the public and to private industries what the city desires out of its streets, as well as for the public to continue to provide continual feedback to us after this first edition is published, so that when the time comes for their street to be redone, that we're constantly refining these designs so that we really have what they want by the time that occurs.
So this is just the first 3 rounds of many potential.
Yeah, it's very similar to like a zoning ordinance. So a zoning ordinance lays out like a good framework for what should happen on different properties, and there should be a group of buildings here, there should be a park here. It's sort of like that for streets, It's not prescriptive. It's not like a legal requirement that you have to build it like that, but it sort of gives us this framework of how the network might look all put together if the entire thing was built all at the same time. But yes, it will have to be updated because as the zoning changes and as development patterns change, we don't want to put in a street that was appropriate 20 years ago, but isn't appropriate now with the changing land use patterns that we see in many areas of the city.
So it is a living document, and they're not necessarily set in stone, both in terms of
Nope.
The public able to submit comments and in terms of altering the things for developers.
That's correct. Yep.
Okay. So so you mentioned that we're pretty much at the deadline now for submitting comments. What's the timeline for rolling out the final typologies document, to the final typologies guidance?
I think it'll probably be the first of the new year. We obviously have some major holidays coming up, so we probably, according to the feedback we've gotten so far, we're over 300 comments so far, and that'll take a little bit to get through, and then addressing all of those comments will take some time. So, but yeah, I'd estimate January, February at the latest, and then it'll be just a constant game of catch up as buildings go up, as buildings come down, as uses change. We want to make sure that we are changing the typology assignment to fit.
Now, so along the lines of this actually being put into use, I get the impression, so my understanding is that this is not necessarily going to be strictly enforced for all projects. Is it more of a suggestion of guidelines, or is it, what does enforcement for this look like? And maybe your office's involvement with these projects?
Yeah, this'll really be our best representation of what the public has told us they want out of streets in a visual form. Now, we don't have any legal framework to say it has to be exactly like this, nor do we really want that, because like I said, we've only created 15 typologies, and that sounds like a lot. I mean, it's an improvement from 3 types of streets. 3 to 15 is a big jump, but they're definitely not perfect by any means. They don't fit perfectly into every street that they've been applied to. And so we know that there's a need for flexibility as that project or that street is redesigned and reconstructed to at least achieve the goals that were established by that typology, if not the design itself. So yeah, we don't really want it to be prescriptive, is what we call it, or required, mandatory, because we know that there's a lot of kind of minute context sensitivity that we're going to have to adapt for block by block and house by house and street by street. And we'd like to give ourselves the flexibility to do that, as well as the confidence for the public to know that this is not just set in stone now and they can't change it. And it's just going to go in that way, regardless of what they say.
Okay, actually, Amy Hawkins just submitted a question. It's kind of in line with this, actually.
Sweet. All right, let me read it real quick. Do you want to read it, Rob? Do you want me to read it?
I'll read it out loud to you, and then you can answer. Yeah. So Amy asks, how are state-owned roads incorporated into these recommendations? Are they just ignored? Hopefully recommendations that you're well aware may go nowhere.
Amy, thank you for being brutally honest. We basically came to a crossroads in the first couple of weeks of this project. That's not a transportation pun either. It's just a term phrase. And we said, okay, we are either going to do the really hard work of engaging all of our partners, the Utah Department of Transportation, the Utah Transit Authority, in designing our streets and their streets in the best possible way, or we can just kind of huddle in our corner and design our streets as best as possible. And we decided to go the former route. So it has been 3 years, I don't know how many meetings, hundreds, to be able to come up with designs that worked just as well for city-owned streets as they do for state-owned streets. And it wasn't comfortable. they weren't easy meetings, but we definitely got to the point where all parties felt satisfied with the designs that we had. There were a couple times where we had to kind of go our own ways, and we created an alternative design for our street versus a UDOT street. And but even that UDOT alternative is heads and shoulders above what we have today. And I would recommend everybody to take a look at, it's on the webpage as well as in the design guide document. But UDOT wrote a really nice page or so about how we're going to apply these typologies to UDOT streets, and it makes mention of a state code, state law, that does require UDOT to basically move as many cars as they possibly can. And they said, you know, while we acknowledge that this law is sort of tying our hands, we also want to acknowledge at the same time that all of these other priorities, person mobility and greening and placemaking and curbside uses, aren't not priorities to us. We still want to make sure that these are incorporated in all of the designs that we do for our streets as well. And that was really nice, because they didn't have to say that. I mean, they don't have to work with us. They can kind of do anything they want with their streets, just like we can do anything we want with our streets. But it was a really good faith effort from all parties to make sure that we were looking at this from the perspective of serving the community that lives here, rather than just siloing and holing up in our own offices and just doing whatever was easiest.
And kind of along those lines of balancing the needs of the different organizations that are really built to support different user bases, almost, right? Like different use cases. It really struck me that in the surveys, the personal mobility score rates so highly. When to me, and this is Janet Hemming has posted a great question in the chat that I'm going to come around to with this. When to me it feels like Salt Lake is more of Salt Lake feels like a commuter city. That makes sense, right? The way it's laid out, kind of the way that it feels like the streets are built for cars. So I thought it was striking that the personal mobility was rated so high in community surveys. You mentioned UDOT and kind of their needs. Is there inherent conflict there? Like, does that make it more difficult to implement these typologies, or can those things all kind of peacefully coexist with that complete streets idea?
Basically, there's limited space, and so you can't have your cake and eat it too. And where there's limited space, we want to make sure that our priorities are very clearly stated. That people, whether they're in a car or outside of car, are always what's most important, and safety is what's most important. But often we sacrifice a lot of things in the name of sort of traffic efficiency, without thinking about the land uses that are along those streets, or the noise from a freeway, or the pollution from a roadway expansion. And so this is really it is kind of a watershed statement by the city, saying that we understand that proceeding or continuing to proceed down the path of just constantly widening and building bigger and bigger and faster is not going to get us to the point that we want to be as a city. There's only so much you can widen before all of the buildings are gone and everything is just streets.
And in this case, sorry, go ahead.
And we want to be proactive now, while it's difficult, but not as difficult as it will be in the future, to adjust our course even ever so slightly, so that people have more options, people are healthier, and our economy is a lot safer and more robust than it would be if we were just relying solely on one form of transportation and one kind of economic model, which is having everybody come into the city to work and then everybody leave in the evening.
Mm-hmm. So by talking about those examples you kind of gave of the widening, like that's all geared towards the automobile traffic, correct?
Yeah, that's
Okay.
correct. And none of the designs that we've proposed in this typologies design guide require the streets to be wider than they are right now. These designs aren't your typical transportation plan in 2021. It does not say, oh, in 20 years we need twice as many lanes as we have today. It's really quite the opposite. It tries to steer us away from that expansion model, because the expansion model can never keep up with population growth. And so if we want to be a successful city 20, 30, 50 years in the future, we need to make correct decisions now, and those decisions are based on design to make sure that everybody feels safe and has all the choices that they need to get around and stay safe and be able to get to their job without constantly being stuck in traffic.
So I want to, now that we've kind of talked about that, I want to give Janet's question to you so you have a chance to address it, because I think it's she's getting it, all of these ideas you're mentioning and how to balance that. I'll read the question just so it's in the video.
Yeah.
There were a lot of emails from community council chairs about parking regulations that would be imposed in their neighborhoods. Go green, Janet writes, is a noble concept, but cars have to park somewhere. And of course, Janet's totally right about that, especially considering, like you had said, the realities of where Salt Lake City is at right now.
Mm-hmm.
So cars have to park somewhere. If those spots are removed by bike path, green strips, road barriers, and other non-auto specific concepts, where are the cars going to park? And Janet's just wondering if you can address that.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And it sort of gets at that concept that I sort of broached a couple minutes ago, which is you can't have there's not enough space for everything, and so prioritizing what we want usually means that we have to give up some of the things that we already have. And the basic concept around transportation planning is that if you build it, they will come, and that applies as much to what we have already as it does to what we could have in the future. And so what we have right now, which is streets and parking designed around just that one transportation choice, is not naturally occurring. Parking wasn't there at the beginning of the world, and it probably won't be there at the end. So we've made these intentional decisions over the last 50, 60, 70 years that have gotten us to where we are today, and really the decision or the choice to prioritize places for people to sit and to walk and to ride their bike and to take the bus over people being able to park their private property on public right-of-way is a difficult decision now, because it means a change in what we've grown accustomed to. But because the implementation of this design guide is really intended to be an incremental implementation, it won't be a blanket policy all at once or a blanket regulation all at once that gets rid of all of the parking in the city. It really will be this step-by-step, street-by-street approach, so that we have time, these generational shifts, to adjust our behaviors and make sure that the future is better than it is today and better than it has been in the past.
This feels like it's actually a good time to kind of transition to looking more granularly at specific examples. Yeah. Actually, we got a question from Aaron Boyce on Facebook that I think will lead us into that well.
Perfect.
He writes, this may be too specific, but I was wondering, after looking at the interactive map, whether the, quote, urban village Main Street model proposed for 2100 South was going to reduce it to one lane rather than two, as it is now. He apologizes if that's too off topic, but I think actually Aaron, I think is right on topic.
Perfectly.
He's specifically thinking about the section just east of 700 East, so 700 East and 2100 South. Yeah. Urban Village. Do you want to like share your screen and open that up and kind of
I have it up right now.
Okay.
I'm so glad that he asked. So this is the interactive map. When you go into the web page, you'll see this, and you can zoom into any place that you want. If you have your location services on, you can click this button down here and it'll take you to where you are right now, so you don't have to search for your home or your work. But this is the section that Aaron's talking about. This is 2100 South, this orange line right here. And the name of the street is underneath the orange line. So if you click on this orange line, it'll come up with this information table about the typology that has been assigned to the street. So it has been assigned an urban village main street, as Aaron said. So then you say, okay, well, I want to see what design is proposed. So you click that second field, and it comes up with this page, which is typology number 7, urban village main street. Let's make it a little bit bigger so we can click on the PDF of it. Oh, I don't want to download it. I just want to look at it. We can look at the PDF of it to make it a little bit bigger. And what we see here is that the design over here shows just 1 lane in each direction, but the table over here on the left says that there can be 1 to 2 lanes per direction, and 2 lanes definitely if the right-of-way is 132 feet wide. So then you see over here that the total roadway width can be between 22 and 56 feet wide, and that 22 would be 2 11-foot lanes, and the 56 would basically be 4 11-foot lanes plus a median. So if we go back over here, median, add in 12 feet, and you get 56. So this gives us the flexibility to use this urban village main street, which could be applied in areas like Sugar House or 9th and 9th, or even some areas east of downtown, 9th West, to give us some flexibility. If we need 2 lanes, great. We probably have space for 2 lanes. If we don't need 2 lanes, then great. We can have more space for the other stuff. But this is one of the typologies that maybe has the most flexibility, because there's a lot of that's going to be determined about the roadway depending on the context.
Great, thank you. I think going through these examples is actually really useful, especially for showing people kind of how to interact with the map and kind of use all the information that we sort of dropped in their laps. So let's take this opportunity to, if anybody else like Aaron has a suggestion of a section of street or an intersection that they would like to have Tom kind of walk through and put up on the screen and talk about, we can take, just submit your request in the chat and we can take a look at it. Otherwise, I'll recommend a couple that we can kind of look at again to keep the ball rolling a little bit. I'm on Salt Lake's west side, so I'm going to pick a west side address. How about 1050 South, 1400 West?
1050 South, 1400 West. So south of the 9 line, west of Parkview Elementary. Is that right? Let me share my screen again and we'll go there and then we'll look at some designs. All right, so starting from Sugar House, let's zoom out. Go over here. There's Parkview, 1400 West. I'd say this is about, that's about 10th South, out there. Okay, let's click on it. Oh, somebody's comments. Thanks, Kevin. All right. Here we go.
I actually keep on hitting that exact same comment by Kevin wherever I click
really?
on the map.
Okay.
So I'd be really curious how to not encounter that Kevin comment.
Strange. Yeah, I'll go and change it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm very confused by it.
Thanks, Amy. This is a neighborhood street. So this is typology number 13. So let's take a look at it. This is our most common typology. A street that you might find kind of anywhere in a residential neighborhood. Let's click on this to make it a little bit bigger. So this is what 1400 West could look like. You have some flexible space on the outside of the street for either parking or for a wider park strip. You have wider sidewalks so that it's more comfortable to walk with your family or to pass people on the sidewalk. And you have a healthier, wider park strip to encourage healthier trees. I think maybe the best example of this that we have already in Salt Lake City is 3rd Avenue in Federal Heights. Let me go there So many of the typologies are actually based on streets that we already have. Oh, that's not good. Based on streets that we already have in Salt Lake City. So they're not these foreign concepts. Oh, I wonder what's happening to Street View. Oh, there we go. Let's see if we can get this to work now. Maybe not. Okay, so this is 3rd Avenue. So you have those 6-foot sidewalks, 7-ish, 7-8-foot park strips. You have parking on both sides in this case, and then you have enough room to drive in both directions. And this matches what we desire for all residential streets, or almost all residential streets that are applied this typology in Salt Lake City. So kind of a cool example we can go and look at.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you. So Janet has posted a sort of a follow-up to your response to her earlier question.
Yeah.
And I think there's a really good point in it that is, I think it may be important to bring up and kind of explore as to how this, as to what kind of the way that you have formed these typologies and kind of are making these recommendations. Like basically, Janet notes that, Salt Lake City is going to continue to grow. We know that. And we know that based on the realities of the infrastructure at present, there are going to be needs for that possibly expanded, car infrastructure, like volume capacity. And it may not be feasible for everybody to transition to cycling or to
Sure.
mass transit and all that. So, based on your recommendations and these typologies, it does feel like maybe your office wants to push people in that direction. Is that?
Well, we want to give people the choice. And that's really what the Typologies design guide is about, and what these designs are about. It is, if you want to drive, you can drive. If you want to walk, you can walk. If you want to use the bus or the train, it should work as well for you regardless of what choice you're making. Myself, for example, I got dropped off. My wife drove me this evening. I rode my bike to work on Friday, and I took the bus to work on Thursday. So it's not really an all or nothing kind of approach. It's making sure that we have a healthy diet of transportation choices, and that our streets don't just serve kind of like a 30 minutes to 60 minutes of the day when people are driving to work or driving home from work. We want to make sure that our streets are working for us at all hours of the day, whether we're at home or whether we're at work or whether we're going shopping. We want to make sure that there's space for us and that they're safe. And what we've seen is that a constant investment in trying to keep up with population growth, which Janet, I think, so accurately discussed in her comment, trying to do that, trying to keep up with that growth through transportation infrastructure improvements, widening in most cases, will only lead to faster traffic, to more money being used for more public money being used for transportation, without much real benefit, because we can never really keep up with population growth or with demand. So this approach, yes, it will take some changes, and it will take time too. It's not something that we intend to implement wholesale tomorrow, but we see it really as the only way to ensure a successful future for us, where people still want to move to Salt Lake City because they know that they have transportation choices. They can live in places where they don't need to have a car, or if they want to have a car, they still can. And we want to make sure that the people who do need to drive can drive, and that they're not stuck in traffic behind people that could otherwise be using, by their choice, some other form of transportation.
Now, in Jenna's response, she did use the word aspirational, and it does feel like, and this is kind of why I wanted to circle back to this. It does feel like part of this, based on the survey responses for people saying they want that, pedestrian, the personal mobility is the highest, and then the car, the auto, is the lowest priority. It seems that the responses you're getting from the community that are driving these typologies are themselves, almost more aspirational than actually utilitarian. And
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, what do you want if you had all of the options, right? If you had a magic wand and you could change things, what would you want? Which is really what the Typologies design guide is trying to do. It's trying to give us an aspirational goal to try to attain. We probably won't attain it all, but it's at least there telling us as a community, this is what we value, and this is the direction that we want to move toward. And if that's not correct, that's what we want to know from the public. But what we've gotten over not only these last 3 years, but decades and decades of public engagement is that cars are not serving everybody. They're not serving our younger population. They're not serving our older population. They're not serving those that live in Salt Lake City that don't have a lot of income. And we want to make sure that everybody can get around regardless of what station in life they're in or what their employment looks like, that they can still be fully fledged members of the economy and their community and the city as a whole.
Okay, so and sort of it's kind of along these same lines. It was like Paul Johnson, I think your name was cut off. I'm sorry if it's not Johnson, but I think it's Paul Johnson posted a similar question, saying that it looks like it feels as though, like you say that you want to make sure that the neighborhoods are being given a choice for their future about how they want their communities to work. And, but he worries that it feels like other neighborhoods, he says, particularly west of State Street, are potentially having change forced on them, regardless of their opinions and their comments, from both residents and businesses. And so maybe this is a good opportunity to talk about, I know you kind of mentioned it earlier, but talk about how exactly this is going to be enforced and, whether or not it's ironclad, maybe.
Yeah, that's a great question, and great question from Paul. So let's take like a theoretical example. Let's say that, I don't know, let's say 900 West is going to be redone again. It won't be, because it was just redone. But let's say it's going to be redone again. At that first community meeting, when we go and talk to people about what their needs are and what their desires for the street are, and also what our budget is, because that is often a limiting factor. Rather than just looking out at the street that's there right now to tell us maybe how we should change what's there, the designs that are in the Typologies design guide will give us an alternative, I guess, alternative starting point to that conversation. So that as we come up with ideas for what that street could be, we look at these goals that are shared by every similar kind of street citywide and make sure that we're trying to hit those goals and do as much as we possibly can. One of the I think the really great equitable pillars of this project is that it doesn't matter whether you're on the west side or the east side or the north side or the south side of the city. The same typology is assigned to similar streets in similar contexts. So if it's homes and businesses along a medium-sized street in Rose Park, or it's homes and businesses along a medium-sized street on the East Bench, the street should look the same because our needs are the same, or a lot more similar than they are represented by the streets that we have today. And so the Typologies design guide is aspirational, and it tries to incorporate everybody's feedback, but we know that that's never going to be perfect. And so we don't want this to seem like the end all be all, but rather just an alternative starting point for those conversations in the future.
So along those lines of trying to represent everybody's feedback and kind of gathering feedback, you talked about what it was, more than 5,000 responses over the past 3 input cycles.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that with the previous, I think it was the last input cycle, there was there were some neighborhoods and some communities that were sort of lingering at the bottom in terms of the number of responses. Do you worry that any communities like Paul suggests are potentially being through these typologies? Are there any communities that are potentially being shaped because the amount of feedback and comments they're providing are sort of being outweighed by feedback and comments coming from different communities in different parts of the cities?
I think that is yeah, definitely a potential, and it's a potential in any community engagement endeavor that is not statistically representative, like a phone survey. And so we rely on the engagement and the participation of people, which is why we've made all of the materials available in both English and Spanish, so that they can tell us what they want out of their streets. But yeah, you're right, and I think Paul's right as well, that that with less feedback from those communities, we potentially have less input for what their streets should look like. Another reason why we don't want this to be a prescriptive approach to street design, we just want it to be one tool in the toolbox for when and if that project comes up. But I would always encourage people to be involved, because without your involvement, we don't know what you want. And if a street needs to be rebuilt and the opportunity is there for it to be redesigned, often the loud voices tend to win out. And so make sure that your voice is heard just as much as anybody else's.
So great. Actually, I think that's a great segue to another question that we just got from Corey Ward. And this might be a good transition to kind of closing comments, kind of a call to action, or whatever you think is the next steps are. But you mentioned that these typologies are not meant to be prescriptive. Enforcement is not strict. They're not being like forced, right? They're not prescriptive. Like you said that multiple times, and I think it's a great way to think about it. And you want to encourage community involvement to make sure that those voices are heard. If their voice, if it's people who are traditionally underserved, maybe, or not represented in these types of public comment situations. So Corey asks, besides giving input on the design, what can we do to support and encourage the guide and make sure that it's being followed in our neighborhoods? Like, how can we make sure that, in addition to submitting our ideas, make sure that those ideas manifest in future projects?
Yeah, I would say whether you support the ideas contained in the guide or you don't, or sort of ambivalent, I think that understanding the process of how those are implemented is really important. Knowing when a project's meetings might be happening is really important, as well as any time that you're having conversations about streets or about land use or about public space in general, referring to the Typologies design guide as much as you would to zoning or some other urban design guidelines, I think would be very helpful to us, so that the conversation that we've tried to continue having over the last 2 or 3 years doesn't peter out, and then in 5 years people are like, what's Typologies design guide? I've never heard of that before. So I think it's incumbent on us, and it's on everybody who is interested in this project, either for or against, to continue to work on making it better and work on applying it where necessary and where appropriate in our city.
Great, yeah. Thanks for that. And we're getting more questions, and these are the topics that I really want to explore, but we're out of time. We're going to have to transition to the Spanish language meeting now. So anybody who still has additional questions, I'll ask Tom if you would share your screen and put your contact information back up on the screen.
Let me get it back up.
Anyone with additional questions, please feel free to reach out to Tom. Send him your questions. Go participate in the map. Review the maps and make your comments there too. And definitely, I mean, really great comments, really great questions. And I think, like Tom said, it's incumbent on us as the people who actually have to live in these communities to make sure that what we want is reflected by these typologies. So please, yeah. Tom, if you want to close out with any closing comments, Tom, go ahead too. Yeah, whether you like it or hate it, whether you like me or hate me, that's just fine. I really want to hear from you, because without your input, I'm trying my best. And so with your input, I think we can do better together. And I want to make sure that all of us that live in Salt Lake City, work in Salt Lake City, can be proud of the places that we create. And I think that huge opportunity that we have is our streets. So I appreciate you guys taking the time and spending an hour with us, and please stay in touch, and we'll talk to you soon. Please, Tom, thanks again for doing this. Thanks for sharing all this. Thanks to all the audience for participating. Like lots of great questions. I think lots of great back. I think it was a good conversation. So I really appreciate the engagement. And I mean, we owe this to each other to be engaged with this stuff because yeah, like Thomas said, it's us. It's us and it's ours and it defines our lives. So now we're going to transition to the Spanish language segment. It'll be the same information just provided in Spanish. Edgar Zuniga is here to host. And Edgar, I'm going to pass the baton to you.